Part 1. Before the transformation. My name is Clara Thompson, and I was 33 years old when I felt like life was slipping through my fingers. It was 2017, and I was living in a small town outside Austin, Texas, a place where everyone knew your name but no one truly knew you. I worked a 9-to-5 job as a customer service manager at a logistics company, spending my days glued to a headset and answering the same mundane questions day after day. To say I was unfulfilled would be an understatement. I hadn't planned on this being my life. When I was younger, I wanted to be a journalist or a photographer, someone who could see the world and tell its stories. But life had other plans. After graduating college, I settled for a safe job to pay the bills, thinking it would be temporary. But temporary turned into 5 years, then 10. Somewhere along the way, I stopped imagining anything else was possible. My personal life wasn't much better. I had been married once, briefly, but we were two people trying to solve our own problems through each other, and it didn't work. The divorce had been amicable but left me wary of opening up again. I spent most evenings scrolling through social media, comparing my messy reality to the curated perfection of others' lives. Friends were getting promotions, traveling to Europe, or posting engagement announcements. Meanwhile, I was sitting alone in my small apartment with a glass of cheap wine, trying to remember the last time I felt excited about anything. But the hardest part was that I felt invisible. My coworkers saw me as reliable, someone who could always pick up the slack, but they never really noticed me. My parents called occasionally to check in but rarely asked about my dreams. Even my friends, though kind, treated me as the quiet one in the group, the one who would nod along to their stories without ever sharing my own. And the truth was, I didn't have much to share. My life was a series of routines: work, home, rinse, and repeat. By 33, the weight of my dissatisfaction felt unbearable. I started waking up in the middle of the night with a hollow ache in my chest, wondering if this was all there was to life. Anxiety followed me everywhere, a quiet whisper in my ear that I wasn't good enough, that I'd never figure out who I was supposed to be. I knew I was stuck, but I didn't know how to get unstuck. One day, I remember standing in the break room at work, staring at the coffee machine and feeling tears prick my eyes. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the monotony of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought, is this it? Is this what the rest of my life is going to look like? It wasn't just my job or my loneliness, it was the feeling that I didn't matter. I had no passion, no direction, no spark. Every morning, I dragged myself out of bed and went through the motions, but I felt like I was disappearing a little more each day. The physical toll was undeniable too. I had gained weight over the years, not so much from overeating but from a sedentary lifestyle and constant stress. My energy levels were at rock bottom, and even the thought of exercising felt exhausting. I avoided mirrors whenever I could, hating the way my clothes fit and the dull look in my eyes. It wasn't vanity, it was that I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked tired and defeated, and I couldn't figure out how to bring her back to life. One weekend, I decided to clean out my closet, thinking that maybe decluttering would help me feel a little less stuck. As I sorted through old sweaters and jeans that didn't fit, I stumbled across a box at the back of the shelf. Inside was a set of watercolor paints and a sketch pad. My parents had given it to me for my 25th birthday, back when I used to doodle and paint as a hobby. I hadn't touched it in years. I ran my fingers over the worn edges of the sketch pad and felt a pang of sadness. I used to love art, when had I stopped? I closed the box and put it aside, thinking I'd donate it along with the clothes I no longer wore. But that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I remembered how painting used to calm me, how it made me feel like I was creating something that mattered, even if only to me. The thought brought a flicker of warmth, but it was quickly snuffed out by doubt. What's the point? I thought. You're too busy. You're not even good at it anymore. I pushed the idea away and went back to my routine. Days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. But the box stayed in the back of my mind like a whisper, urging me to remember who I used to be. I ignored it, convincing myself I didn't have the time or energy to indulge in something so frivolous. Then, one evening in late October, I hit a breaking point. It had been a particularly rough day at work. My boss had criticized me for something that wasn't my fault, and a difficult customer had screamed at me over the phone. By the time I got home, I was on the verge of tears. I threw my bag on the floor, sat on the couch, and stared at the wall. I felt so empty, like a shell of myself. And then, out of nowhere, I thought about the watercolors. I got up and dug the box out of the closet. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I felt desperate, like I needed to do something, anything, to feel alive again. I pulled out the paints and sketch pad, cleared a spot on the kitchen table, and just started. At first, my hands felt awkward and clumsy, like they didn't remember what to do. The colors bled together messily, and my brushstrokes were shaky. But as I kept going, something shifted. The frustration melted away, replaced by a quiet focus. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't racing with worries or self-doubt. I wasn't thinking about work, or my loneliness, or all the ways I felt like a failure. I was just there, in the moment, creating. When I finished, I looked down at the page. It wasn't a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, just a simple painting of a flower, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of pride. That night, I went to bed with a strange sense of peace. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I didn't know it yet, but that small act of picking up a paintbrush would set off a chain of events that would change my life forever. The morning after that first hesitant attempt at painting, I woke up feeling different. The heavy fog of exhaustion and self-pity that usually greeted me each day was still there, but it had lifted just slightly. I couldn't stop thinking about the flower I had painted the night before. It wasn't good, any artist would have laughed at its uneven petals and muddied colors, but it was mine. It had been the first thing I'd done in years purely for myself, with no expectations, no deadlines, and no one to please but me. I told myself it had been a fluke, a one-time escape from the grind of my daily life. But when I got home from work that evening, I felt the same pull. Instead of collapsing on the couch with a glass of wine and mindlessly scrolling through social media, I pulled out my watercolors. This time, I painted a sunset, a swirling mix of reds, oranges, and purples that felt as chaotic and alive as the emotions I'd been bottling up for years. It wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. As the brush swept across the page, I felt something awaken in me, a quiet sense of joy I hadn't felt in a long time. By the end of the week, painting had become my nightly ritual. Each evening, I'd lose myself in a new creation, a meadow filled with wildflowers, a peaceful beach at sunrise, the view from my apartment window. I wasn't following any rules or tutorials, I was just letting my intuition guide me. And as strange as it sounded, I felt like the colors were speaking to me. Through each brushstroke, I was processing emotions I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Fear, anger, loneliness, hope, it all spilled onto the page in vibrant, messy swirls. But the real shift came one Friday night. After finishing a painting of a forest bathed in golden light, I sat back and looked at it, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. On a whim, I snapped a photo of it and posted it to my Instagram account, captioning it, "Trying something new, still rusty, but this felt good to create." It was meant to be a small moment of vulnerability, a quiet declaration that I was trying to reclaim a part of myself I had lost. I didn't expect much, maybe a couple of likes from the handful of friends who still followed me. But within minutes, comments started pouring in. "This is beautiful. Wow, you're so talented. I didn't know you painted. You should post more of this." I was stunned. People, friends, acquaintances, even old co-workers, were responding with genuine enthusiasm. It wasn't just the compliments that struck me, it was the fact that people saw me in a way I hadn't seen myself in years, as someone capable of creating beauty. That night, I fell asleep with a small, but growing, spark of hope. Over the next few months, I continued painting almost every day. My coworkers began noticing the change in me. "You look lighter," one of them remarked in the break room. And they were right. The dull ache in my chest that had plagued me for years was fading. I started sleeping better. I stopped dreading the mornings. Even my posture changed. I stood a little taller, my shoulders no longer weighed down by invisible burdens. But with this new joy came fear. As much as I loved painting, I couldn't shake the nagging voice in my head that said it was a waste of time. "You're not an artist," it whispered. "You're not good enough. What's the point?" That voice almost won. For weeks, I hesitated to take my art beyond the safety of my kitchen table. But one evening, I came across an ad for a local art fair being held in Austin. They were accepting submissions from amateur artists, and the fee to apply was minimal. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking in the empty application form. I wanted to do it. I wanted to take a chance on myself. But the doubts crept in again. What if people laughed at my work? What if no one even stopped to look at it? I closed the laptop, telling myself it wasn't the right time. But the next day, as I walked to the break room at work, something caught my eye, a flyer pinned to the bulletin board. It read, "Stop doubting yourself. Take the leap." It was an ad for a motivational seminar, but the words hit me like a lightning bolt. That night, I reopened the application form and filled it out. I submitted 3 of my paintings, the golden forest, the beach sunrise, and a new piece I had poured my soul into, a bold, colorful abstract that felt like a reflection of my newfound hope. I hit submit before I could second-guess myself and immediately closed the laptop, my hands trembling. The day of the art fair arrived quicker than I expected. I borrowed a foldable table and some easels from a coworker who dabbled in photography, and I spent the night before carefully packing up my paintings. As I stood in front of my small booth that morning, surrounded by dozens of other artists, I felt completely out of my depth. Some of them had professionally printed banners, business cards, and portfolios. Meanwhile, I had a handwritten sign that read, "Watercolor Art by Clara." For the first hour, no one stopped at my booth. People walked by, glancing briefly at my paintings before moving on. My insecurities screamed at me to pack up and leave, but I stayed. I had promised myself I would see this through. Then, a woman in her 40s with curly red hair approached. She stopped in front of my golden forest painting and tilted her head, studying it closely. "This is beautiful," she said. "It reminds me of the woods behind my grandmother's house." "How much is it?" I blinked at her, unsure if I had heard correctly. $75? I stammered, though I had no idea if that was a fair price. She smiled and handed me the cash. "I'll take it." As she walked away with the painting tucked under her arm, tears welled up in my eyes. Someone had chosen my art. Someone had seen value in what I created. By the end of the day, I had sold 3 more pieces and collected a handful of business cards from people who said they wanted to commission custom work. The art fair wasn't just a success, it was the first time in years I felt truly seen. Encouraged by the experience, I decided to keep going. I created a dedicated Instagram account for my art and started sharing not just my paintings, but also the process behind them. I posted time-lapse videos of my brushstrokes, photos of my messy workspace, and captions about how painting had helped me rediscover myself. The response was overwhelming. People started messaging me, asking if I could create something for their living rooms, their nurseries, even their wedding gifts. At first, I worried I wouldn't be able to keep up. Between my full-time job and my growing art business, I was stretched thin. But every time I sat down to paint, I felt a sense of fulfillment that made the long hours worth it. One evening, I received a message from a woman named Sarah. She wrote, "I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. I've been struggling with anxiety and feeling stuck, and seeing your art has inspired me to start drawing again. You've reminded me how healing creativity can be." I read her message 3 times, tears streaming down my face. My art wasn't just changing my life, it was touching others, too. There were still challenges, of course. Balancing my day job with my art business was exhausting, and I often questioned whether I was doing the right thing. But every time I doubted myself, I thought about that first night I picked up the paintbrush, how it had saved me from drowning in despair. This was more than a hobby now, it was my lifeline, my purpose. And as scary as it was to put myself out there, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. Part 3. After the transformation 2 years later, I stood in a bright, airy studio that smelled faintly of paint and fresh coffee. Sunlight poured through large windows, illuminating the rows of colorful paintings lining the walls and drying racks. The sign above the door read, "Thompson's Studio and Gallery." I had painted it myself in bold, swirling letters, as a declaration to the world, and to myself, that this dream was real. The studio wasn't just a place to sell art. It was a space where people came to learn, create, and connect. Every week, I hosted workshops for beginners, helping them discover the magic of painting just like I had. Watching others pick up a brush for the first time and see their own potential, it was as fulfilling as creating art itself. The journey to this point hadn't been easy. After that first art fair, my hobby had blossomed into a side business, then into something much bigger. At first, I was juggling commissions and weekend fairs while still working full-time at my customer service job. There were days when I was utterly exhausted, wondering if I was crazy to pour so much time and energy into something so uncertain. But every sale, every kind word, every "thank you" from someone whose life had been touched by my art kept me going. Eventually, the demand for my work grew too big to ignore. One night, after finishing a commission for a client's anniversary gift, I sat down with a spreadsheet and a glass of wine, calculating whether I could afford to take the leap and pursue my art full-time. The numbers were tight, but they weren't impossible. What tipped the scale wasn't the finances, though, it was my heart. I had spent so many years feeling invisible, trapped in a life that didn't fulfill me. Now, I had found something that made me come alive. I wasn't about to let fear hold me back. The day I handed in my resignation letter was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. My boss, though surprised, was supportive. "It's not every day someone leaves to follow their passion," he said. "I admire that." The transition wasn't perfect. There were months when sales slowed, and I worried I had made a huge mistake. But instead of giving in to panic, I got creative. I started offering custom watercolor portraits and teaching virtual art classes, sharing my techniques and my story with people from all over the world. To my surprise, these classes became some of my most popular offerings. People weren't just coming to learn how to paint, they were coming to rediscover their own creativity, just like I had. One of the most profound moments came during a workshop I hosted at a local community center. A woman named Diane, who was in her 60s, approached me at the end of the session. She held up the painting she had created, a vibrant sunset over a lake, and tears filled her eyes. "I haven't done anything creative in decades," she said. "I thought I'd lost that part of myself. But you've helped me find it again." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I realized that what I had built was so much more than a business. It was a bridge, connecting people to their own sense of possibility, to the joy of creating something with their own 2 hands. The studio became a gathering place, a sanctuary for anyone who needed it. Moms came with their teenage daughters, laughing as they painted side by side. Young professionals stopped by after work, trading their laptops for brushes and palettes. Retirees found a new spark in their golden years, experimenting with colors they hadn't touched since childhood. And through it all, I grew, too. I wasn't just an artist anymore, I was a teacher, a mentor, and a business owner. I learned how to market myself, how to handle tough clients, how to keep going even when self-doubt tried to creep back in. But most importantly, I learned that I mattered, not because of how much money I made or how perfect my paintings were, but because I was showing up for myself and for others in a way that felt meaningful. One day, as I was tidying up after a workshop, I got a message on Instagram. It was from a woman named Amber, who had been following my art journey since that very first flower painting I'd posted years ago. "Hi Clara," the message read. "I just wanted to thank you. Your story has inspired me to start my own photography business. I've been scared to take the leap for years, but seeing what you've accomplished gave me the courage to try. I don't know if I'll succeed, but for the first time, I'm excited to try. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to chase your dream." I sat down, my heart full. Messages like Amber's had become more frequent over the years, but they never stopped humbling me. To think that my journey, one that had started with a dusty box of watercolors in a cluttered closet, was now inspiring others to pursue their own dreams, it was more than I could have ever imagined. Looking back, it's almost hard to recognize the woman I used to be. The Clara who felt invisible, who went through life on autopilot, who believed she wasn't good enough. She's still a part of me, but she no longer defines me. I've learned that transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a series of small, brave steps: picking up a paintbrush, signing up for an art fair, opening yourself up to the possibility that you are capable of more than you've ever believed. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I feel a sense of purpose that fills me with gratitude. My life isn't perfect, I still have struggles, and there are days when self-doubt tries to creep back in. But I've built something that feels true to who I am. And the best part? I know this is just the beginning. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: your favorite thing, the thing that changes your life, might be hiding in a dusty box or an old memory. It's never too late to rediscover it. It's never too late to rediscover yourself. What about you? Have you ever rediscovered a lost passion, or found a new one that changed your life? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Let's inspire each other.